Tobias, Celia, Lars, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you. Now, the next panel will have 25 minutes to answer a very, very big question, which is, what is next for defense tech in Europe? And the panel will explore what is actually going to happen and how the whole defense tech industry is going to change from the way it is funded to the way that it's been built and deployed. And 3 panelists to unpack the structural changes reshaping the ecosystem. I want to invite to this stage, first and foremost, Blythe Crawford, the director at Tiberius. He served in the Royal Air Force for over 30 years. He was flying very, very fast jets, retiring as commandant of the Aerospace Warfare Center. And you might be forgiven for not knowing what that center is, but it was the center that led the UK's efforts to support Ukraine, and it revolutionized really the approach to rapid innovation. Now, Blythe runs Tiberius Aerospace. Please take a seat. A defense technology company that built to empower NATO allies with continuously evolving defense systems. Next up, Christopher Magazzeni, the investment director at Lakestar. He leads investments across aerospace, defense, industrialization, and resilience technologies throughout Europe. He began his career as an aerospace engineer, so we have some certain aerospace theme going on in this panel. And he completed a PhD in partnership with Rolls-Royce at the University of Oxford before moving on to work at the European Space Agency. But prior to joining Lakestar, Chris also was a VC at IQ Capital, where he led the firm's aerospace and defense investment practice. Next up, Ben Saunders, co-founder and CEO at Arctic Research and Development. So not aerospace at all, I'm afraid. It is a UK-US technology company that's building hardware, software, and autonomous systems for Arctic operations. And mind you, Ben is actually a legit polar explorer. He is also the first person to ski solo to both poles, and he holds the record for the longest human-powered polar journey on foot. So what's the longest? How long is the longest?
2,898 kilometers, 1,800 miles.
My God. Round of applause for Ben Saunders. And to moderate this conversation, who would be better than Ingrid Lunden, the managing editor at Resilience Media, a seasoned and very well-respected technology journalist with decades of experience covering this ecosystem. Please give a warm round of applause for this panel. 25 minutes to answer what is next for defense tech in Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me, you three. So first of all, I'm just going to start this off by asking them their favorite kind of herring. No, I'm not, really. If you were listening to the last panel, I guess you'd get that joke. I just wanted to say that it's future of defense tech, but I thought it might be more appropriate if we talked about the frontiers of defense tech, since we've got 2 people that are kind of at the bookends of it. You've got one talking literal frontiers, geographic frontiers in the form of Arctic tech, and we've got somebody doing the forefront of defense tech, really completely groundbreaking work that Tiberius is doing. So maybe we can just kick off with a little bit of a description of what they're doing, and then we will go into talking with Chris as well to close that in. So let's start with tech frontiers, and Blythe. Give us a bit of a rundown of what you're doing over at Tiberius, with Grail and with Tiberius.
Thanks, Ingrid. So delighted to be here, and thank you for having me along. So I left the Ministry of Defence this time last year. Up until that point, as Ingrid mentioned, I've been heavily focused on developing new capability for Ukraine. And the big lesson for me was whoever innovates fastest, scales quickest, does it the cheapest, is the person that's going to prevail. So it wasn't about necessarily tech focused, it was about process innovation. So how do we do those things quicker? And I think, you know, if you look around the room here today, I don't think there's anybody in this room that would argue that we need to go faster and we need to break through the bureaucracy and process that kind of slows us down, and we need to find a way of doing it cheaper. So one of the concerns I have is that we have lots of echo chambers like this where we all agree in the room. It's about finding the belly button that can make things differently. But I was fortunate then to bump into Andy and Chad, who said, hey, listen, we're going to build a company that's going to build a platform that is going to innovate faster, scale quicker, and do things cheaper. So with their background in Silicon Valley, Andy was one of the people that built the Apple App Store, who better to kind of partner with in terms of building that digital platform that enables SMEs to spirally develop against blueprints for weapons, so you have new capability in hours rather than months and years. Then federating the manufacturer across hundreds of manufacturers. We've had a lot about federation today. And then putting everything onto an Amazon-style marketplace where you can pick and choose at the time to purchase the capability of relevance to meet your need at any particular time. And we're then developing a whole series of weapon systems that use Grail to deliver them.
Right,
It's very
which
exciting.
is in keeping with the whole collaboration theme
Exactly.
of the day. Right. Ben, let's hear about your version of Frontier.
Gosh, yeah. Actually, disclaimer: I wasn't the first to go solo to the North Pole, North and South Poles. I'm either the second or third. There's a mystery Russian,
Well.
a mystery Russian who claimed to have done it in the 1990s,
Well,
but before
you know
GPS.
what we think about Russians
So
now,
it's a small club, but in some ways, who cares?
Right.
But I do know the Arctic rather well, and I mean, in some ways, I spent most of my career dragging sledges for a living, so the worst person imaginable to have on a tech panel. But one of the reasons I fell in love with this place, and one of the reasons that it appealed to me, just from a personal sort of challenge perspective, in my late teens, early 20s, my first proper Arctic Ocean expedition was 2001 from Russia, so 23 at the time, was that it seemed incredibly hard. There were a bunch of really complex problems to solve. So that was kind of, just became like intrinsically satisfying itself. And along the way, for about 2 decades, I had this perennial frustration that most people seem to profoundly misunderstand the high Arctic. And I'd meet seemingly well-educated grown-ups who thought that the North Pole was maybe in a forest clearing in Lapland with a log cabin, and they were surprised to hear that it's actually in the middle of 14 million square kilometers of ocean. So it's a place that for most of my career, very few people have really seemed to understand. So in some ways, overjoyed, not least because we started this company, that it's been all over the headlines in the last 12, 18 months. But for us as a startup, and maybe I'm just a sort of a sucker for punishment, but for me, I love the fact that the Arctic punishes incompetence pretty harshly. So there's quite a good moat and quite a good barrier here. Like it doesn't suffer fools, and you can't vibe code your way or sort of get enough PR hype to get to the North Pole. It involves some quite challenging physics.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, and we're going to go, I'm going to ask you more later on how you made the leap from being an explorer into being a tech founder, because those don't necessarily, although I think you gave us the key just a moment ago.
I enjoyed protracted, tests of pain and endurance, basically. Yep.
Exactly, which is probably a good point to bring in Chris into the conversation, because you're a pain applier or a pain reliever. Which one are you? You're a VC.
I'd like to think we're pain relievers.
Yeah, pain reliever. Okay, so tell us about your role as a paracetamol in this equation. So where are your, where do you see the future of tech, the frontier of tech? What is your role, and so on?
Yeah, you know what, just especially because we've kind of made the analogy of the VC as the paracetamol here, I think probably the most interesting analogy for all defense tech people in the room is really what happened to space about 5 years prior. And this is the thing that actually drove me into the VC world, really, which was that, up until the 2010s, VC in space was the game of a couple billionaires. The joke being the way that you become a millionaire in space is by starting as a billionaire. You
mean literally space?
In space.
In space, above the Earth.
Above the Earth,
yeah.
That's correct.
Right.
And very, very rapidly, the onset of SpaceX, the onset of a bunch of entrepreneurs and VCs who were willing to take the risk, meant that the industry changed completely. And we went from what was a pretty centralized model of government gives agency money to give prime contractor contract to subcontract technology development and vice versa, go back to then achieve a mission, became this sort of loose collection of VCs willing to take a bet and give founders who were mad enough to give it a go a bunch of money to give it a go. And in 2019, it crossed a pretty interesting threshold for someone who was working at the space agency at the time, which was that it superseded our budget. Or in other words, as management in ESA did not appreciate as much, VCs loosely became the third largest space agency in the world after the US and China, putting ESA down to the fourth.
Collectively speaking.
Collectively speaking.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so if you think about it from the point of view, again, if paracetamol is the right analogy, the whole point here is that we're trying to A, change the model a little bit, and to your point around process innovation, hopefully do something that's more beneficial, but B, enable people to try and do things differently. And I think the analogy between space, again, formerly government gives one or two, a couple more prime contractors big money for technology development, to now VCs giving founders the ability to develop products that are much, much better, is directly applicable to defense tech. And I think that we have, in this environment, in this opportunity here, the chance to really change the way that the sector works in the same way that the entire space industry now looks completely different to how it looked like 20 years ago. So, short answer, we throw money at people who are bright enough and willing to subject themselves to pain to solve problems.
If I can follow up on that for a moment with you, it's quite interesting because, I mean, what you've kind of described is the model for all VC, really, if for any bit of tech. But where did you find and how did you find it to make the leap from regular VC into all kinds of tech, into specifically defense tech? I mean, it's something that's come up a lot today, this idea of like, once there was a VC panel and everyone, pretty unanimously said it was a taboo area for the longest time. Now it no longer is. I'm going to then ask you the same thing, so get ready. You, of course, have been in defense for your whole career in a lot of ways, so we'll talk about that separately. But yeah, please tell me.
Yeah. There's a couple of things here. Like the broader question is like, what is the specific catalyst that makes defense tech VC work now as opposed to 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
And again, using the space analogy, and really, I've always just been doing space and defense VC. The two catalysts are, one, the customer behavior is somewhat different, and two, the technological outlay is somewhat different. And specifically insofar as defense, I think we'd all agree, unfortunately, we are in a position in which the world is not what it was for the last 40, 50 years, certainly from a Western perspective, especially from a Western European perspective. That is the thing that is fundamentally changing the customer behavior. We now have a need to do things that we didn't, thankfully, have a need to do before. But on top of that, necessity begets innovation. And we are seeing, and again, I think everyone would agree in this room, the driving force of the Ukraine conflict and others in pushing the way that we fight. And the fact that the way that we fight is now different to the way that we have fought historically. Those two things, I think, set the scene for what I think fundamentally VC at its core is, which is either the precursor or the follower to change.
Yeah.
And the only thing that matters is markets in which there is significant change, either they're market creation like computing, or they're in market changing like biotech or otherwise, in which the demand signal is completely different, the product's completely different, therefore the old guys are not very good at doing it anymore, means that mad people who are willing to take insane risks on the financing side, which are generally called VCs, exist.
Commonly known as. Okay, thank you. And Ben, if you could kind of answer something for me, which I'm really curious about. You've kind of explained how you went from being an explorer to a founder because of the, a love of hard problems, of intractable issues that don't suffer fools, etc. But where did defense come into it then? Because was it that you landed on defense because, I mean, you're a dual-use company anyway. It's literally in your name.
Yep.
Your research and development is your name. But and I know you target government and military, but also researchers and academia more widely. how did you move into defense because you saw it as already a willing customer for what you were trying to build, or did you move to what you're building because you felt a movement the way that Chris has just described that pulled him into supporting defense?
Yeah, gosh. Actually, to caveat this, I had a little taste of VC life. So I was a scout for Sequoia Capital for a couple of years, and not that long ago. But
I did see that in your LinkedIn.
But I do remember something I had to sign early on, which definitely lumped defense in with gambling, pornography, drugs. It was
Is that what you were scouting for? Gaming.
I mean,
gambling,
I can neither confirm nor deny. But and in fact, this is how I met one of my co-founders.
Right.
I thought that VC sounded like the life for me. I think I was mistaken. I think I'm definitely wired like a founder. But and I was endeavoring to start one of those anachronisms called a climate tech fund, which is just, unless you rebrand it resilience, they've just vanished.
Right. Okay, so you were scouting for ESG.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I digress. So I was going to also, so paracetamol, I mean, we are VC backed, and one of my co-founders is a VC, so I can't be too disparaging. But for us, it's been the analgesic, but it's also been sort of anabolic, kind of steroids, amphetamines. We couldn't have got where we are now, which is within 12 months of a fateful conversation. We had hardware, we had sold hardware into a Ministry of Defense, and it was being used in Northern Norway.
Did you build the business thinking that would be one of your target?
Yeah, and it wasn't.
Are we going to reconcile ourselves to working with defense? Yes, I.
Yeah. No, I've remembered your question now. Well, I was also a million years ago in the army, but not even for 12 months. So I can't claim to have served. I managed to sweet talk my way into Sandhurst, which is the Royal Military Academy. I don't have a degree. I'm still on my gap year, age 48, and they basically insist you have. So I loved the challenge of getting in as the underdog, but I realized once I was in, I didn't respond that well
to your explorer
following orders. And turns out one of the cool things about getting older is that friends from back in the day. So one of my teenage rock climbing buddies is now a brigadier in the British Army, and I saw him December last year with his family, my family, and we hiked up a hill, and the sun was going down, and I think he meant to be out of earshot, but he sort of walked off with his son, who's 11, and put his arm around him and said, "You see, George, a place worth defending." And I think I've always had, since I started to get to know this place, I've always felt a deep sense of stewardship for the High Arctic, and also, I think partly, if I'm absolutely honest, I may have had some daydreams on my first expeditions, in my kind of early to mid-20s, on my own, on the Arctic Ocean, goggles, sort of pretending that I was Luke Skywalker on Hoth, the ice planet, and sort of secretly hoping at some point in the future I'd be called on, for my skills, for some Arctic rescue mission. I didn't think it would get this out of hand, but what has struck me more than almost anything in the last year is sort of how far behind we are. Rich, and I'm blanking on his name, but the Rear Admiral who spoke earlier was talking about Russia's Northern Fleet capability. And Russia has extraordinary Arctic capability, full stop. Right. And I know because I've done 2 big expeditions starting from the north of Siberia. So I've done a lot of flying in, slightly sketchy Russian aircraft, and stopping off at various bits of military, infrastructure to refuel. And they're really good at it. And moreover, no one's quite sure. They've got 50-something icebreakers, 11 nuclear ones, I think 7 or 8 in service right now, a few more being built very quickly. And we've got nothing like that in the West. The only non-Russian polar ice class 2 vessel afloat right now is a French cruise ship called Le Commandant Charcot. It's a really cool boat, but it's a cruise ship. It's for wealthy tourists. So we just even the new cutters being built in Finland for the US and Canada are about a quarter of the installed power of the big Russian nuclear icebreakers, which can operate indefinitely, year-round, any ice condition. So they can go anywhere on the Arctic Ocean, and we can't.
Right.
So I hadn't really realized that until the last sort of 18 months. Like, we're on the back foot here.
Right, got it. Blythe, so we have somebody who came to this through observation and experience and Luke Skywalker dreams. You, of course, have a career in the military that brought you, well, it's also, you've done other things too. In fact, you're an academic, you know, you've had lecturing positions and you've gone to business school and all of that stuff. So you've had a pretty interesting career leading up to here. Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting, you're now at a startup. Do you feel that you see a lot of interlopers in the business? Or are you feeling like, you know, there's a lot of people who are, you know, legit, and do you separate them from each other?
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, I'm definitely not a Jedi Knight. I'm not a Luke Skywalker. I'm more of a Wookiee. I think Chris here is my Yoda. He keeps me on the straight and narrow. But yeah, so I ended up getting into defense tech primarily because my general told me to. It was about 12 years ago, and General Barron's was rolling out a thing called Warfare in the Information Age.
Yes.
And he said, Blythe, I want you to roll this out, but in typical British fashion, I'm not giving you any people, and you're not getting any more money. So I had to be innovative.
Too far for the course.
Yeah, so interestingly, you were talking about the Arctic. I was actually part of the Pentagon's Arctic Working Group in 2010, and we were talking about the lack of icebreakers in 2010, 16 years ago.
And still nothing.
And we still have done nothing about it.
It's like the runways at Heathrow.
Yeah, so exactly. But so then I've been involved with defense tech for over a decade now. And I've definitely seen an evolution. And to Chris's point, you know, I think there's a convergence of like three factors. One being the obvious sort of geopolitical situation and government spending more in defense. Well, let's go and focus on that. Second one being the sort of blending of civil and military technology, because everything that we do now in defense is underpinned by energy, data and comms. But everything in the civil sector is underpinned by the same things. And there's this merging of technologies which naturally draws people from the tech sector into defense and go, oh, I can use this bit of tech in a defense-related way. So, for example, one vignette, there was a fintech data analytics company, a startup from Northern Ireland, who we were looking at what they were doing and it looked quite exciting. They then pivoted from fintech to Formula One. And we tend to think we're very special in defense. We've got loads of data and it's all very, very classified. That's an absolute load of nonsense.
Data is data.
Data is data. And actually, if you work in fintech, your data is really valuable and you have an awful lot of it, because if your algorithm is 0.01 of a second slower than your adversary, that costs you $1 billion. So interestingly, the best people in data analytics in the world are in fintech. They're not in defense. Anyway, this company took their fintech analytics product, applied it to Formula One, and the teams they were working with then started winning. Interestingly, if you look at Formula One teams now, they don't refer to their partnership with their engine producer. They refer to their partnership with their data enterprise. So we started applying their algorithms to F-35 data. And the first time we ran our data through their washer, it delivered 21,000x faster than what we'd done before. So for me, getting into tech and into that dual use space and then going to a startup that's leveraging that sort of thing, it was a really, really powerful message and a really obvious direction to travel in. Yeah, in terms of interlopers versus genuine people in the business, there is some fantastic stuff out there, and I've been really enthused, and big thanks to Toby and Leslie for what they've done, because I had never felt the buzz that I'd felt at the first Resilience Conference in London, where we'd actually, for the first time, brought together people from the tech sector and people in the military, and I went, oh my God, this is the revolution we have been waiting for, and we're now starting to get people over the line. So I think, and given the fact that it's become so attractive, and we pull in audiences from left, right, and center, I think there's a genuine interest to get after this and to solve end-user problems. But of course, there are going to be people out there who are going to milk them, but they get found out pretty quickly.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of Physics X. That's the quintessential Formula One team. They were basically designing the vehicles, and now they're into defense tech.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting, fintech to Formula One to defense tech route, it seems.
Yeah, I missed out on the Formula One.
Chris, it's quite interesting because, what what you get, the picture of in the startup world, and looking whether it's deep tech in the frontiers of defense tech or the really, what everyone is doing, drones or something more commonplace, I guess you could say. There are a lot of companies, and a lot of them need funding, and then a lot will need the follow-on funding. Where do you see all of that going? Talking about the frontier of, going back to the theme of the conversation. I find it like it seems somewhat untenable, especially when we're talking about the startups that are not building directly for customers right away. Yeah. The ones that are doing R&D, for example.
So I'll make it abstract, but also try and tie it down to, I think, what matters. I mean, I'll leave the frontier geographically to Ben and the frontier technologically to Blythe. And I'll talk about, let's say, the frontier in adoption. Because the big elephant in the room, I guess, that we've not discussed as much on this panel so far is Ukraine. And I think we're well into 4 years of the full-scale invasion. We're well into whatever accounts you want to take, 1/3 Russian casualties, 30,000 Russian casualties a month, whatever you want to call it, but it still doesn't stop. And I think what's astonishing to me is that 4 years ago, if we think of the investing space, it was niche, it was certainly taboo in many circles to be investing in defense. There were a few colleagues of mine, some in the room, that were pushing it back then. And in many ways, I think it's super laudable that they were doing it then. It's even better that they're doing it now. I think it's great that there's more people doing it now. But we are still in an interesting environment where maybe we would have predicted a somewhat different dynamic 4 years on. And what I mean by that is, on the one hand, it's cool. There's lots of investment going into companies. There's some that are raising hundreds of millions of euros. It's fantastic. They do all sorts of things. Some of it's a huge guess in the dark. Some of it's super tangible and an immediate use case. No matter what, that's the game. It's cool. We'll see in 5 years who wins, and that's kind of the model. What's interesting to me is two things. One is the split is pretty unusual in terms of who's investing, i.e., it's still super heavy American investors at the high volume end of it.
In Europe.
In Europe in particular, right? The US investment into European defense tech is way over proportional to its general US investment into European tech in general. That's driven in part by a few things. One is ourselves and others raising money, dedicated vehicles for defense, in order to move past structural barriers that had previously hampered European funds from investing in tech. That is something that is being worked through. That's great. And I think we're starting to see a huge success wave of that this year. US funds didn't really have that problem, and so I guess they didn't need to wait. What's interesting to me is that they saw the opportunity even before other European funds did or European LPs did.
Yeah.
And I guess the sad long-term thing is that in many ways they will be the primary beneficiaries of European tax dollars going to European companies, giving US investors returns, bar a few who were pushing earlier than others. But I think that's one thing which is interesting, which I think I would conclude with, change is hard. Change on the LP side, change on the fund side, change on the entrepreneur side, pushing for in the immediate instance, what is it that proves that your company, that your product is good, which is going to Ukraine, and B, proving out from the customer model and helping the customer in Europe learn the developments that have happened in Ukraine and what we should learn from that and how we should do better, and B, the successes that come from that. So I think that's probably what we're going to start seeing as the market consolidates to the winners in the next few years.
Okay, we're out of time, but I just want to ask two quick, just yes/no questions. Any plans on Tiberius doing things in Arctic at any point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely keen to.
Are you guys raising any money? Because that's been you've been very hush-hush about that.
No comment. We've been deliberately under the radar, which has been challenging for me because so much of my old world had this sort of necessary evil of kind of self-promotion, publicity. but we've been deliberately kind of under the radar. I think that'll change soon. We will be more visible.
All right.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, exactly. maybe you two will make a deal now. Okay. Thank you so much, you three. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right, Blythe, Chris.